You say a live performance cannot be repeated. Why?
A live performance is a moment in time, unique and unrepeatable. Everything, from the energy of the crowd to the musician's mood, the sound dynamics of the venue, and even the weather, impacts the experience. It's like a conversation between the artist and the audience, and no two conversations are exactly the same. Once it's done, it's gone. And that's part of its magic.
When did you first become aware of the difference between live performance of a song and its recorded and produced version?
You know, that realization really hit me because of a guy named Mike Millard. Mike the Mike, they called him. It was back in the 70s when I got my hands on some of his bootlegs. He'd sneak into concerts in a wheelchair with professional recording equipment hidden inside, and the tapes he captured were just unreal. Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, some of the biggest names in rock, and he was getting this raw, unpolished sound that you'd never hear on the polished studio versions. The first time I heard his bootleg of Led Zeppelin, it was like a whole new world opened up. The official recordings of a band like that, yes, they're powerful, but they're layered, produced, and cleaned up. I missed the extra guitars and thought the songs sounded empty, but realized this was a completely different medium altogether. When I heard Zeppelin live through Millard's recordings, the sound was rougher, more alive. Jimmy Page would take risks, play around with solos, and there was this unpredictability to it. You could hear the human element, the imperfections, the energy of the crowd, the little interactions between the band members. That was the moment I realized that the live performance has a spirit you just can't capture in a studio. It's fleeting, spontaneous. Millard's tapes made me see that the produced version, for all its perfection, is almost like a different work of art altogether.
So, you feel like the imperfections in live recordings are part of what makes them special?
Absolutely. Those imperfections, whether it's a missed note or some feedback from the amp, that's the real stuff. That's the band interacting with the moment, reacting to the crowd. Mike Millard, with his guerrilla tactics and top-tier equipment, managed to preserve that raw energy. It wasn't just the music he was capturing, it was the experience. The adrenaline, the unpredictability, stuff that never makes it to the studio album. Listening to those bootlegs is like being right there in the venue. You can't edit out the human aspect, and honestly, that's what I want as a musician. The studio has its place, but when I play live, I want that electricity, that sense of risk. That's where the magic happens.
Do you think that each listener hears the same performance differently, depending on their state at the time?
We bring ourselves into the music, our emotions, our thoughts, even our level of consciousness. Someone might hear melancholy where another hears joy, depending on what's going on in their life. Music is deeply personal, and it interacts with the listener's inner world, so no two people hear it the same way, even at the same time.
Is most improvised music performed live?
Yes, most improvisation happens in live settings because it thrives on the immediacy of the moment. There's a risk and a reward in live improv that's hard to capture in a studio, though some jazz and experimental artists do it in recording sessions. But live improvisation is about reacting in real time, feeding off the audience or the environment, and letting the unknown guide you.
Is music created in the now a form of high art, for example? Jaco Pastorius's collaboration with Carla Bley, Bruce Ditmas, and Pat Metheny?
I'd say so, yes. When musicians create in the now, they're channeling something pure, something from beyond the mind's control. It's art in its most unfiltered form, and it requires mastery to pull off. That collaboration you mentioned is a perfect example. There's a kind of sacredness in it. The musicians are fully present, reacting to each other, creating something that can't be replicated. It's a high art because it's born out of pure expression, free from the constraints of premeditation.
Is the recording of a live performance different from the actual performance?
Yes, it's different. A live performance is a whole experience. There's an energy exchange between the performer and the audience, the atmosphere, and even the imperfections that make it real. A recording, on the other hand, can capture the sound, but not the full experience. It's like trying to hold on to a shadow of something that was vibrant and alive in the moment. You might hear the notes, but you miss the electricity in the air, the spontaneity, and the shared emotions of being there. It is said the classic live album by Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous, was 75% live and 25% overdubs. Also, a David Bowie live album added some vocals afterwards in the studio because of a mic malfunction. Does this make these albums less than live?
How do you manage to convey that atmosphere live, especially when the production in the studio is more complex or layered than what you can recreate on stage?
It depends on how you define live. Purists might say those albums are less authentic because of the studio tweaks, but I think it's more complex than that. The energy of the live performance is still there, and the core of what happened on stage is intact. Overdubs or fixes, like Bowie's vocal issue, are about polishing what was already captured. It's more like restoring a painting than repainting it. The live essence is still there, but the final product has been shaped to meet a standard. So, I wouldn't say it makes them less live, just a bit more polished maybe.
It sounds like you view live performances as living, breathing interpretations of the songs rather than strict reproductions of the recorded versions. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but the main thing I want to ensure is that the atmosphere or essence of the song is conveyed to the listener. This task is sometimes made more challenging if there is a minimal amount of production, like no reverb or fewer instruments than appear on the recorded version. When you're recording, you have the luxury of layering sounds, crafting textures, and creating an atmosphere that's perfectly controlled. In a live setting, you're working with a stripped-down version of that, often relying more on the raw energy of the performance to carry the emotion. On this point, I was to emphasize that not all songs translate into an acoustic format. For me, some songs do sound gutless or lifeless when played without certain atmosphere-creating instruments like keyboards. I focus on what really matters, the core emotion of the song. Sometimes that means simplifying the arrangement, stripping it down to its essence. You don't need all the layers if the heart of the song is there. Other times, I might change how I perform certain parts to evoke the same atmosphere. It could be a more intense vocal delivery, a different dynamic approach to the instruments, or even engaging the audience in a way that pulls them into the mood. The key is to adapt without losing the soul of the track. The crowd plays a huge role. Their energy feeds into the performance, and it's a two-way street. You give, they give back. Sometimes that makes up for the lack of studio polish because there's this exchange that elevates the moment. If the audience is fully engaged, you can feel it, and it almost doesn't matter if you're missing some production elements. You're in the moment, and that connection becomes the magic. Imperfections are part of the human element, and that's what makes live music so special. In the studio, you can strive for perfection, but on stage, it's about being present, being vulnerable, and letting the imperfections tell their own story. Sometimes, those unexpected moments, whether it's a cracked note or a spontaneous change in the arrangement, end up being the most memorable parts of a performance. They give it character and make it feel real.
It sounds like you view live performances as living, breathing interpretations of the songs rather than strict reproductions of the recorded versions. Is that fair to say?
It depends on the song and the vibe I'm going for. Some songs benefit from that polished, cinematic feel you can only achieve in a studio, but others come alive in a raw, stripped-down setting. For me, it's about balance. Some tracks need that production sheen, but others are better when they're gritty, spontaneous, and alive in the moment. There's a kind of purity to a live performance that you can't replicate in the studio, and vice versa. Both have their own magic. Live performances are more fluid, more about interpreting the song in the moment. The recorded version is like a photograph, a captured snapshot of how the song sounded at that time. But live, the song can evolve. I might change the arrangement, extend a solo, or slow things down, depending on the mood or how the audience is responding. It's a constant dialogue between the music, the band, and the crowd, and that's where the magic happens. No two performances are ever the same.